I'd like to take a moment to recognize some individuals who are with us. Because I'm really checking again now. Some individuals who are with us tonight. The provost is present tonight. Would you please wave your hand? Thank you. And the chair of our department is present tonight. Professor Maurer, would you please raise your hand? So we are happy to have them. Would all of the faculty members who are here tonight just kind of put a hand up? Great, round of applause for the faculty being here tonight. Nice numbers. We are pleased that you've joined us tonight for what I know will not just be interesting, but thought-provoking and challenging, because tonight's speaker does nothing less in his words and his actions. Professor Mathew Oakes challenges us in the best ways possible to be the best human beings, the best community, the best world we can be. I'm proud to claim that he is a member of the Rock Valley College community, in part because of me. Along with Dr. Stephen Donahue, I interviewed Professor Oakes for an adjunct teaching position in the Composition and Literature Department in 2009. I confess to being less than impressed than Dr. Donahue because I discovered then certain suspicions about Canadian white males. Charge it to stories about the Underground Railroad or to their general belief that they speak a French which is superior to the French spoken by my Louisiana kinfolks, and there you have it. However, my opinion of him has improved significantly over the years. While his work as my colleague in the Communications, Composition, and Literature Department, and as a member of the faculty has been exemplary. He chairs the Academic Council and the Composition Committee for us, and he sits on several other academic committees. And his scholarship and publications achievements have been and continue to be outstanding. 3 of the 5 pages of his vita list his presentations and his publications. I, though, have been most persuaded by his teaching and by his work as a member of the PAIC committee. In his classroom, students are presented with reading content and writing opportunities that demand deep critical thinking and that challenge their comfortability. With knowledge and skill, he navigates them through conversations on privilege, race, class, gender, sexuality, religion, or as we like to say, any and all of the isms. As you probably know, tonight's lecture is being co-sponsored by PAIC, which stands for Promoting an Inclusive Community. We are the body committed to making sure that any student at Rock Valley College is welcomed for who he or she or they may be, that the contribution he or she or they may make is encouraged and valued, and that all aspects of the college work to support that goal. Since joining PAIC, Professor Oakes has been at the forefront of several of our initiatives, including this one that focuses on disabilities. Most importantly, he is not simply a teacher or a member of a committee, he is more precisely an ally. An ally, according to Andrea Azavizian, is a member of a dominant group in our society who works to dismantle any form of oppression from which she or he receives the benefit. Allied behavior means taking personal responsibility for the changes we know are needed in our society and are so often ignored or that are left to others to deal with. Allied behavior is intentional, overt, consistent activity that challenges prevailing patterns of oppression, makes challenges that are so often invisible visible, and facilitates the empowerment of persons targeted by oppression. As an ally, Professor Oakes is a model for his students and colleagues and what it means to work to realize the potential we all have for doing good and making the world a better place for everyone. The potential to stir up good trouble, to challenge the status quo, and to have the back of those of us who live the challenge every day, and to inspire real and lasting change. He is dedicated to family, friends, profession, and the cause of equity, justice, and real change. And I know he has my back. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in receiving Professor Mathew Oakes.
Well, not sure who she was talking about, but thank you, Paulette. That was a remarkably generous introduction. When I go to bed at night, that's the person I hope that I am, and so thank you very much. So obviously, thank you to Paulette for her warm and kind and generous introduction. Thank you also to the Office of Academic Affairs and the Provost, as well as Kathy McCarty for all their behind-the-scenes work and sponsoring events like the First Tuesday Lecture. Thank you as well to Jason and from IT, who's helping us out this evening. I also wanted to let you know that I have slides available for you in print form. I didn't print enough for everyone here, but if you need a copy so that you can read it a little bit more closely, please raise your hand and Danielle can get you one. There are a few people in the back there, Danielle. Also, I just wanted to be sure and say that we've set up the room kind of in a mixed fashion, kind of traditional lecture style down here, tables around the outskirts. If you feel the need to get up and move around, if sitting in a chair is not the best way for you to receive information, I will not be offended or distracted if you need to move. Please go ahead and do that. Before I get into the content of my lecture this evening, I also wanted to draw our attention to a few other events that are taking place this month that are part of our disability awareness initiatives. Co-sponsored with Hispanic Heritage Month is the Eviscerart Flamenco Lecture and Show. That's this Friday at 6:30 in the PAR across the creek there. On Friday, October 23rd at 9:30 in the morning till mid-afternoon is Disability Mentoring Day at Stenstrom Center. It's a day when adults, young adults transitioning into adulthood who have disabilities get the opportunity to practice job interview skills and other kinds of events, other kinds of skills. And then lastly, and I have handouts for these. They're on the tables if you wanted to pick one up on the way out. October 27th through 29th, we have the Allies for Inclusion exhibit coming to campus. It will be in this space for 3 days, and it is a traveling exhibit that brings attention to the disability rights movement as a civil rights movement and challenges community members and educators to work as allies. So I invite everyone back for those events later on. One of the things that's a challenge as an educator is that we often address issues that are near and dear to our heart and are potentially contentious and difficult. And we have to walk this fine line with our students where we don't want to be overly heavy-handed with our own agenda or our own point of view politically. Events like this, however, operate in a slightly different space. I was reminded of this last Friday when I stood on the stage with Professor DeLonzo, and he took a moment on Friday to both draw attention to the terrible events that took place in Oregon last Thursday, as well as to call for sensible revisions to gun laws. So I want to first echo his sentiments and honor the victims of violence last Thursday and draw our attention to that issue. I also want to take the opportunity to talk about another issue that's near and dear to my heart. As a result of the insane stalemate going on in our state over the budget, a countless number of social services have gone either underfunded or have completely lost all funding. There are too many for me to name, but I will draw our attention to one of them, and that is the autism program, TAP. TAP is a statewide initiative that provides autism support services for individuals with autism and their families, and it has been gutted. Many of the sites have been closed. Many of the staff has been reduced to one individual. That's the case in our area. There's a TAP service center at the University of Illinois Medical School. One person left on staff. Their ability to support individuals with autism in our community has been decimated. And I would encourage you, if you're so willing, to visit save-tap.org, sign the petition, and send an email to your legislators to restore funding. Thank you. On with the show. So, my lecture tonight makes sort of a two-pronged argument. So I'll overview the argument now, and then we'll revisit it a few times as we move through its two parts. So the first argument the first part of the argument is that there are two topoi, and don't worry, I'll define that term in a second. There are two topoi which structure most contemporary representations of autistic people, and those topoi are alarm and awareness. And the second part of my argument is that these topoi are activated at particular moments to achieve specific purposes, and when they are activated, they bring with them certain opportunities and also certain limitations. So that's what I'm trying to talk about tonight. Before we get too deep into the argument, I want to lay the groundwork for some terms, just some ways that I'm going to be using language that are specific to my discipline, which is the study of rhetoric. So when we think about the study of rhetoric, what we often think about is that we're studying how we use language to organize arguments effectively. And when we study it, what we're really doing is we're thinking about how we organize thoughts, right? How do we walk through our world and organize ideas in such a way that they become sensible and purposeful? So one of the key assumptions that underlines the study of rhetoric is that words make some things possible and they make other things impossible. When we talk this way, these things become possible. But at the same time, when we talk that way, these other things over here become impossible. So when we look at rhetoric, when we look at language, what we're doing is thinking about how language is being used purposefully and how that use brings both possibilities and limitations. Obviously, the specific subject matter that I'm going to be talking about tonight are the representations of autistic people. And so I wanted to pause for a moment and just offer up two possible definitions for this term, autism. When we look at the way autism is described and defined, we can kind of put it into two camps. We have one camp, which is the medical model. Under the medical model, autism is defined as deficits in three areas: social, emotional reciprocity, nonverbal communication, developing, maintaining, and understanding relationships. And those are the three criteria that come from the latest edition of the DCSM-5. Under a neurodiversity model, autism would be described as a genetically based human neurological variant. So you can see then in the DSM or the medical model, there's a focus on deficit, on autism as a problem that needs some sort of options. Under a neurodiversity model, however, what we're looking at is just simply difference, right? That there is a neurological difference, it's a neurological variant, away we go. So this term neurodiversity is one that's sort of coming to the foreground in terms of thinking about autism. And neurodiversity is really just a concept where neurological differences are to be recognized and respected as any other human variation. Some people are autistic, some people aren't. It's how their brains work, and that's enough. Lastly, in terms of terms, part of this sort of tension between the two models, the medical model and the neurodiversity model, is how to describe individuals who are on the autism spectrum. Some people prefer something like person with autism or person who has autism. Some folks don't like that because it seems to emphasize the medicalization of autism, right? That it's like having asthma or something, right? It's something that has come upon me that I need to get off somehow. So those folks preferably prefer the term like autistic or an autistic person. On the other hand, referring to someone as autistic or an autistic person seems to go against people first language. Those of you who are familiar with disability rights, sort of the de facto status is to refer to the person first and then a disability second. So there's some tension here. So if you know someone who is autistic, the best thing to do is ask them what do they prefer and use that consistently. You'll see tonight that I kind of ping pong between them all. Okay. So back to my argument. So there are two topoi, these common. Did I skip topoi? Thank you. Thank you, Brian. So topoi, very important. So topoi is a Greek word. The plural form of it is topoi. The singular form is topos. And it's Greek for place. So in its earliest usage, it literally means like a place that you might be standing on. In rhetorical terms, we use it in the same sense of like a common place, right? A common way of using language. Crowley and Haughey define it as statements which circulate within members of a community. So when we're thinking about the study of rhetoric and the organization of ideas, we're thinking about topoi, common ways of using language that organize and have purpose. Okay? So back to my argument. So there are two topoi, which structure contemporary representations of autistic people: alarm and awareness. These topoi are activated at particular moments to achieve specific purposes and bring with them both opportunities and limitations. So I want to offer up to you two starting places. So how did I arrive at this argument? Where did my thread of thinking come from to get us to a place tonight where I'm offering up these arguments to you? And I want to offer you two starting places from contemporary culture, two places where we see autistic individuals being represented and discussed. And what you'll notice, I hope, is that they're very different. And it's from the difference between these two starting places that my argument emerges. How many of you know this young fella? So this is Max Braverman from the NBC show Parenthood. That might ring a few more bells. So in 2010, we were introduced to Max Braverman, who's one of the many grandchildren of the family that it's a family drama, Parenthood, and he's one of the grandchildren. And the major plot line that we observe that deals with Max is that he's much younger than he is in this video here at the beginning of the show. And so we see him beginning as sort of this quirky kid. He's seemingly misunderstood. He doesn't have a lot of friends. And there's sort of this ongoing question, like, what's going on with Max? What's happening here? And as the show progresses, we see Max and we see his family walk through the process of being diagnosed with Asperger's, which is an autism spectrum disorder, and then going on about his life and learning about his own Asperger's and learning how to interact with individuals and so on. So I want to show you this clip in a second, which is the actor Max Burkholder. So the actor and the character have the same name, okay? Discussing the impact of his role on the way we think about autism. And what I want you to recognize and listen for is that how his role puts to the forefront of the way we're thinking about autism this sense of an ongoing individual who sort of spikes an interest in autism and Asperger's specifically. So I'll have you press play.
The audition process for Parenthood, they brought in like a doctor who specialized in working with children who have autism and Asperger's. And he sort of, went through the basics with us. I knew nothing of it beforehand. Since getting the part, I've done research on my own online, just going to places like autismspeaks.com, met a few people who have Asperger's, have autism, things like that. I have gotten a pretty good response from that community. I've done quite a few events for things like Autism Speaks. It's a lot of fun, when you get to help people out like that through just doing something that you love to do. The day after the second episode of Parenthood aired, Asperger's was the second most, I believe, searched term on Google. Everyone there is really comfortable with each other now, and we're all like really good friends. I have a particularly good relationship with Monica Potter in particular. She's very nice. Dax Shepard, definitely the person who makes the most jokes on the set. I'm a close second. For Max, I'd like to see him get more friends, Any girlfriends I'd like to see Max have. Let's get Angelina Jolie on Parenthood, play a 15-year-old. This is Max Burkholder from Parenthood. Please make sure to watch it Thursday nights at 10 p.m. on NBC.
So as the video here indicates, Max's role really just sparks this interest and this awareness in the community's eyes, the culture's eyes, about autistic individuals, particularly someone with Asperger's. This is really the first time that network television has seen a fully formed character with Asperger's or an autism spectrum disorder being portrayed as an ongoing character, not just a minor character, not just a one-off, not just a static character, but a fully fledged, dynamic, round character who has all sorts of experiences, right? We see Max struggle to communicate, we see him struggle to make friends, we see him struggle to respond to his sensory environment, but we also see a dynamic character who changes over time. He loves his family deeply, he's very intelligent, he's very funny, he has heartbreak, he loves, he loses, right? There are all of these dynamic characteristics that Max displays for the very first time on network television for us. So like all other characters in the show, Max's life includes difficulty, but he also thrives and he grows, right? He changes, again, like all the other characters in the show. Which brings us to starting point number 2, which is a pretty significantly different representation of autistic people in contemporary culture. Can you click on the slide? It'll click off of the video. Yeah. Okay. So, Max emerges on the screen in 2013. The final episode of Parenthood aired last spring. In 2013, so right sort of smack and dab in the middle of the run of Parenthood, the largest autism research and advocacy organization in the country, probably in the world, Autism Speaks, called a summit, a national summit in Washington, D.C. in order to advocate for change and additional funding. They wanted to see what they called the national plan to address autism. And on the night before they released, or before they had the summit, the co-founder, Suzanne Wright, who's pictured here with the other co-founder, Bob Wright, and their grandson, who's autistic. She released on their website this statement, which was meant to be sort of a rallying cry, sort of giving the argument for why this national plan was necessary in the first place. So I'm just going to read a part of it for you. So she writes, "This week is the week America will fully wake up to the autism crisis. If 3 million children in America one day went missing, what would we as a country do? If 3 million children in America one morning fell gravely ill, what would we as a country do? We would call out the Army, the Navy, the Air Force and Marines. We'd call up every member of the National Guard. We'd use every piece of equipment ever made. We'd leave no stone unturned. Yet, for the most part, we've lost touch with 3 million American children, and as a nation, we've done nothing. No more. Tomorrow in Washington, D.C., we will gather an unprecedented number of bipartisan officials, congressional leaders, and experts in every area of autism for a 3-day summit. We will demand a national response." And she goes on from there and she uses the phrase, "This is autism," and she offers up these brief anecdotes of individuals and their experiences with autism, and all of them, by and large, focus on difficulties, scenes of struggle, scenes of reactions to sensory environments that are uncontrolled. It's very dark, very difficult material. So the backlash that Suzanne Wright and Autism Speaks receives as a result of this is really difficult to overstate. Autism Speaks had always been critiqued for a number of reasons, primarily because most of their funding goes to research cures or origins of autism, and very little of it goes to support services. But the way that Suzanne Wright described autistic people here was just was caught upon by autistic individuals and their advocates, and it sort of seemed to demand a reply. And that reply mostly took place on the internet. Within about a week, That phrase, "this is autism," became a hashtag being used on Twitter, where individuals who didn't like Suzanne Wright's descriptions of autistic people used "this is autism" as a reply. And so they were offering up their counter responses to her descriptions. There was also a Flash blog that was created 1 week later on November 18th. The Flash blog was sort of almost like a collaborative opportunity for all different autism bloggers to create submissions for this single blog. And all day long, it just released blog after blog after blog after blog every couple of minutes for the entire day. I think one of the most poignant responses is this one, which I'll read to you in a second. And it seems to kind of capture the response that Suzanne Wright's comments garnered. So this is written by a man named Tim Tucker, and he has a son who's autistic. He doesn't tell his age or his name, but this is how he responds to Autism Speaks and Suzanne Wright. "Dear Autism Speaks, my child is not missing. He's right here. I just put him to bed a few minutes ago. Nighttime is one of our most precious times together. I sing his favorite songs, and we say our nighttime words. Some may call it a script. I call it a holy liturgy. When I am done, he gives me a quick kiss. Maybe he will go to sleep soon after. Maybe he won't. But I am there, and he is there with me, and neither of us are lost." So this is the sort of reaction that Suzanne Wright's comments garner. But then how do we start to make sense out of these two very, very different representations of autistic people in contemporary culture? On one hand, we have this conversation that's seemingly like some sort of genocide or epidemic, where suddenly 3 million people children have been lost, right? Where are they? Where did they go? On the other hand, we have Max, this lovable, affable young man who has struggles and difficulties, but is loved and surrounded by his families. He has experiences much like other kids his age. They're just slightly different. And we have these two. We have these two ways of thinking and talking about autistic people. And how can we make sense out of them? So these are my starting places. And so my next question for myself is, how does rhetoric and the study of rhetoric help us to begin to unpack what we're seeing here? So I'll return to my orientation as a rhetorician, and presumes that language is always at work, right? Language is always doing something. Language is always producing some sort of effect. It's always intentional, even if its intent is unintentional by its author, right? That it's doing something. It is at work. And I'll also return here to that notion of a topoi or a topos, right? That there's a commonplace, that we see in culture these ways of talking that circulate. And those ways of talking are productive. They do something. They accomplish things. So what I would submit to you then is these two examples, my two starting points of Max and Suzanne Wright, are representative examples of two different topoi in the way we talk about autistic individuals in contemporary culture, and I'm calling them alarm and awareness. I do also want to draw attention to the fact here that I am intentionally talking about representations of autistic people by non-autistic people. We're not talking about autistic self-representations here. These are representations of non-autistic individuals. So let's take these two topoi a little bit further and look at a few more representative examples of how these might play out. So the first, or the next, that lines up with alarm is a documentary that was co-produced by Autism Speaks. And you will see, as you listen, you'll hear this question of alarm, or this notion of alarm, emerging quite dominantly. So it's from, this is the trailer for the documentary. The documentary was released in 2014 on Netflix, and it's called Sound the Alarm. Okay? So we'll watch it, and then we'll talk about it.
This thing is climbing and climbing, and you don't die from autism. You're going to have it the rest of your life.
We want our child to say, I love you. We don't want him to become a Rhodes Scholar at Harvard.
In a period of 3 or 4 months, he lost everything.
There is a huge autism tsunami that is going to hit the state budget if they don't take steps to ensure that the kids are getting treatment.
We might have to cut supports and services that we're providing to the folks who need us the most. fact that we have to move in this country to a different location just to receive the right to get covered by health insurance is wrong.
I feel like I'm failing as a mother because I didn't help him.
If I didn't get hurt and I was still active duty, Shane would be covered just like any other active duty family.
Why isn't more money being put into research to find the causes of autism when it's more common than things like diabetes and AIDS and cancer?
By understanding what's causing autism, we're going to be understanding what causes many of the neurodevelopmental disorders that plague children in our country and across the world.
We all want to help our children. It doesn't matter what language we speak. Autism speaks no language.
So we see here the documentary sounding the alarm, pretty clearly ringing the alarm bell, right? That there's something bad that is happening, and we need to do something about it. So we see the ways in which autism is described here in a number of ways. We hear it being described as a tsunami, this sense of a force that's coming from God knows where, and is going to hit us and like crush everything in its wake. We hear it being described as a crisis, right? That there's something deeply wrong here and we must address it. Perhaps it's so wrong that it's an epidemic, right? It's like the bird flu or something. It's everywhere and other people are getting it and we can't control it. And what are we going to do? How do we stop it? And then lastly, we see this conversation about on the rise, right? This question of that the numbers keep going up. More and more people are autistic. What's happening? It's this pandemic, it's this epidemic. And we see it associated with words like plague and more common than cancer. So we often see this topos of alarm attached to the medical model, right? That there's something wrong that needs to be fixed. Something that's incorrect that needs to be righted. So that's the awareness topos. Now let's contrast it again against awareness. So what you're going to see here is a brief video. It's from a Comedy Central special from last year called The Night of Too Many Stars, and it's hosted by Jon Stewart, and it's basically a telethon, and they're trying to raise funds for autism support services. And so it's a telethon, so there's celebrities and individuals coming to tell their stories, and the piece that I'm offering you here is a description or some home video of this young girl named Jodi DiPiazza, who is autistic, learns to play the piano, releases a viral video of herself playing Katy Perry's Firework, and then is invited to the telethon to perform with Katy Perry. So we're just going to watch the first few minutes of it.
We've told you why people with autism shouldn't be written off, why they deserve, like everyone, the chance to reach their potential. That's why we're here tonight. That's why we're doing this. So let's take a look at what happens when someone actually gets that chance.
Jodi was diagnosed right before her second birthday.
What they told us was, we don't know what causes autism. There's no cure for it. It's a lifelong disability, and don't expect too much.
All these dreams we had for her, I had for her, all of a sudden they vanished.
At 3 years old, she started school, and she went to a full day of intensive therapy, constant teaching. And then when she came home, she did another 2 hours of therapy in the house.
The time that she started with us, she really was barely able to form a sentence, couldn't really speak. Jodi would engage in pretty severe tantrums when you disrupted any of her routines, if things didn't go her way. She would become aggressive, and she might tip over chairs, tip over tables, cry, scream, very, very distressed.
kitchen. Thank you, Bridget.
You're welcome. Almost everything was taught to her from a very young age.
We were extremely lucky to have gotten into a program where my child was able to access exactly what she needed.
We picked up early on that she was very interested in music.
Anything she would hear on TV or on the radio station, she would just walk over to her keyboard and start playing. She loves music, and I think through music and through songs, she's making herself known. She puts everything into it. It's been difficult, hard, but it's amazing how far she's come.
We were afraid she would never speak, never dreaming that she would sing or even be able to understand. And as the education continues, I've taken off that idea that there's some limit on her because she, continually proves that that's not true.
Hello, everybody. I'm gonna play Firework by one of my favorite singers, Katy Perry.
And then she proceeds to be joined on stage by Katy Perry, and I won't make you suffer through Katy Perry. So when we see the activation of awareness as a topos, typically some of the associations that it's making are a need for support and a sort of a generous familial environment, right? That those are the kinds of things that an autistic person needs. The awareness seems to focus on potential, the possibility that is inherent in an autistic individual. It also seems to focus on positive change over time. It does dwell on difficulty, but there's always this sort of transition away from difficulty and towards positive outcomes later in life or change over time. It also seems to focus on unique abilities, that in the case of Jody, that she had a number of difficulties, but she had this gift for music, right? And the gift for music becomes this unique ability that's a carrier for her to become something else. And so awareness seems to kind of pull on these ideas of support, potential, positive change over time, and unique abilities. So on their face, it seems that alarm and awareness are pretty opposed to one another, right? That hopefully I've demonstrated the first half of my argument, that there are two topoi which structure contemporary representations of autistic people. They are alarm and awareness. The thing I want to ask now is about their functionality, right? What is it that these representations do? How do these topoi function? What do they achieve? So I don't want to assume a judgment necessarily of either of them. We can hold that off for now. I just want to simply ask, what do they accomplish? When we bring alarm to the scene, what is the scene? When we reach for alarm as a way to describe and discuss autistic individuals, what are we trying to accomplish? It seems that when we activate alarm, that we're trying to get people to do something now. That there's a sense of immediacy, that the issue at hand needs action today. And it usually gets associated with things like legislative change. So anytime we want individuals who are in political positions or administrative positions to do something different than what they're doing, we usually will reach for alarm. When we want more money, Governor Rauner, we usually start talking about alarm, right? We start using that topos as a way to make the case for the need for additional funds. And this kind of makes sense. If everything's coming up roses, why do we need more money? Also, we activate alarm when we're talking about access to education or support within educational environments. We seem to reach for that when we're trying to make the case that our educational systems are not as accessible to autistic people as they should be. And we also seem to reach for alarm when we're trying to make the case for more or better or different treatment options as possibilities for people. So in all of these cases, there's a sense of immediacy. There's something going on right now that requires change, and alarm may just get that work done. On the other hand, why do we bring awareness to the scene? What is going on? What is the scene that causes or gives rise to the need for the awareness topos to be activated? This one, unlike alarm, seems not to be about immediate concerns necessarily. Typically, I think awareness gets activated when we are trying to produce ongoing cultural change over a period of time. So there's this different kind of consideration that the work or the change that needs to happen isn't one that can possibly happen today, but it's one that can happen, incrementally over a period of time. So typically awareness is brought to the scene when we're trying to respond to biases or overturn stereotypes, when we're talking about the possibilities that autistic people have as contributors to society, what's possible, and what do we keep from being possible, and how do we stop that? Also, awareness seems to be drawn to the scene when we're trying to represent autistic individuals as members of families, as people who have friends, who are friends to others, who are loved ones and lovers, people who are real people, real human beings with lived lives. Awareness seems to be the cause there. Also, when we're talking about the possibilities for lifelong achievement, what is it possible for autistic individuals to do and accomplish? Awareness seems to be the topos that we pull on to get that moving. And then lastly, when we're talking about the need for maximum independence, lifelong independence, awareness seems to do the work there as well. So what I'd like to submit is that it seems to me that alarm and awareness aren't so much in opposition to one another, but rather they are sort of gears or levers on which we pull when we need to get certain things done, right? That when we need Governor Rauner to release funds to the autism program, we're going to start pulling on the alarm lever. When we're trying to overcome biases and cultural change, say on a campus like this, we're going to start pulling on awareness, like we're doing tonight. Right, that we're trying to do these, we're using both of these available options rhetorically to do some work, to get something done. Which of course doesn't mean that they come without problems. One of the things that I mentioned earlier was that anytime one topos makes something possible, it's either limiting or making something else possibly impossible. So I want to draw our attention to some of the limitations here that these topos bring with us. So the alarm topos seems to always focus on limits. Seems to always focus on what autistic people can't do rather than what they can. Alarm seems to typically focus on cure or origins in that medical model. Seems to frequently highlight differences. These are the ways in which autistic people are not like everybody else. And it also seems to presume helplessness, that the only way that autistic individuals can have better lives and better experiences is by us good people doing something else. They need our help. Awareness, too, has limitations. Awareness, I think, seems to reinforce this notion of special, right? That people with disabilities, specifically someone who is autistic, is special. They're still different somehow, but they're special, which contributes to what we would call like the mascot phenomenon, right? This sort of tokenism, that we know that we are good people because we treat special people good. Which doesn't really help anything. And I think awareness still also highlights difference. It still doesn't really focus on autistic individuals as being just like everyone else, but rather on the ways in which autistic people are not like everyone else. Back to my argument. So there are two topoi which structure most contemporary representations of autistic people, alarm and awareness. These topoi are activated at particular moments to achieve specific purposes and bring with them opportunities and limitations. So in conclusion then, I'd like to draw our attention to the fact that these topoi have both possibilities. When Autism Speaks pulls the alarm lever and releases funds, that can be a really good thing. When awareness levers get pulled and Jon Stewart's telethon raises lots of money and awareness and hopefully overturns some biases, those are good things. But there are also limitations, and that's some of what I just overviewed. And part of that limitation is that neither of these topoi assume the full inclusion and capability of autistic people. Neither assumes that it's possible to live in a radically different kind of world where our political, educational, and social lives don't simply have to accommodate different people, but that difference is presumed, it's expected, and it's anticipated. That difference ain't no thing, it's just what it is. Some people are autistic, and we get over it. We can find threads of this other way of thinking. In some locations, there's a movement inside of autism advocacy called the Self-Advocacy Network, and these are autistic individuals who self-advocate, as the name would suggest. And I want to close by reading for you a statement that they've made on their website. They have a series of position statements, and this is their position on disability rights and neurodiversity, specifically a subsection entitled Acceptance of Difference. So the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network says, the disability rights perspective within the autistic community is represented in the neurodiversity movement, which promotes social acceptance of neurological difference as part of the broad landscape of human diversity, and seeks to bring about a world in which autistic people enjoy the same access, rights, and opportunities as all other citizens. Acceptance of difference is essential to understanding, accepting, and benefiting from the contribution of everyone in our society. Thank you. So I think we have some time for questions before we dig into the cookies and punch, if anybody has a comment or a question. No need, yeah. Topoi for the plural. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think in some ways I'm in a poor place to judge that question, in part because I'm more heightened to the conversation than perhaps others. But I think that the alarm is easier to grasp, and therefore a little bit more salient for most folks. Something bad needs help, right? That's all you need to know for alarm. Something bad, someone needs help. So I think that if it's not more dominant, it's certainly more accessible than awareness. Awareness gets a little fuzzy around the edges in terms of identifying a need or a purpose. Thank you. Others? Yeah, Rob. Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah, I think that's where Max from Parenthood is a really great example of a just sort of a normal autistic person, in that he doesn't really have any like special talents, and it sounds terrible for me to say that, but that's the whole point, right? He's just a kid. He's good at some things, he's bad at other things, he likes these things, he doesn't like those things, he likes that girl, but she doesn't like him. He's just sort of normal. And I think you're right, that there is this perniciousness to it. There's this Rain Man phenomenon, right? That, there's this heightened intellect or something, and people are people, and there's a whole range of possibilities inside of that spectrum. Did that answer your question? Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Right. And they also seem to focus on children, right? There's a lot of folks that say if you listen to contemporary culture, everyone who's autistic is either under 5 years old or this one 70-year-old woman, Temple Grandin, right? That's it. And even my representation here is focusing on representations of children primarily. But yeah, absolutely. It does not speak to lifespan differences. It does not speak to any other kinds of range of differences. Yeah. Hi, Robert. Yeah. Sure. So I drew attention to one social program in Illinois that's gutting, its funding has been gutted. There's a laundry list of others. So there's no way, I would not assume that there's sort of a targeted perniciousness towards TAP specifically. But yeah, I think that there's a sentiment that says social services are someone else's problem and not the government's, right? That it's a big government thing to do, and Rauner likes little government. I think it's purely financial, and I would say that only based on the fact that it hasn't been targeted. It's on this list of 70 other, same, the Epilepsy Foundation has also had their funding gutted. So, if anything, it's a targeting of vulnerable people, right, who can't seemingly fight back, so he thinks. Tell him, of course, we sick Courtney on them. Yes. Mm-hmm. Right. So I can only speak to that from my own personal experience of having a kiddo going through public school who's getting autism services. And I think it's a mixed bag, right? That some folks, like Liam's preschool teacher who is specialized in teaching autistic kiddos, is remarkably well trained, and she should be leading the district's special education programs. And she's remarkable. I mean, she's phenomenal. And then there are others who think they know what they're doing or think they know what they see, but they don't. There's I think that's probably the most difficult part, is that sort of altruistic sense that they know what's happening but don't actually know what's happening, right? That they work off of that stereotypical sense of what an autistic person looks like, and then they look at my kiddo and they go, "You sure?" Right? And so I think that's where the problem comes in. And then, of course, there are just folks who aren't trained or don't want to be trained, or so it's one of those things that I don't think there's any one way that it's exhibiting itself in the districts. Certainly not our experience anyway. But rather, it's a spectrum of reactions, of strengths and weaknesses. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I will redirect to the provost of our institution, and maybe we can get that on her list of agenda items. Noted, right? Yeah. So the short answer is no, there isn't a specific program currently, but I think you make a compelling case. Other comments? Hi, Gloria. The question was about my own personal experience, my wife and I's son, Liam here, and how we kind of figured out that he is autistic. For us, we saw some, we didn't immediately jump to that, of course, because I don't think we knew enough to suggest, we didn't know enough about autism in the first place to kind of go, oh, that's what it is. Rather, we saw other kinds of attributes and difficulties, right? So Liam struggled to speak. Liam struggled to make eye contact. Liam struggled to respond to his sensory environment. And so we started seeking out help, and we made use of state-funded services like the early intervention program, also being gutted. And it was by getting into that program and starting different therapies that we started to, move towards that as an appropriate way to describe his experiences. So, it's very typical in that way of sort of early signs. I think the difference for us was that we were pretty, we responded quite rapidly and moved more quickly than a lot of other people probably would have or could have. And so we were able to get to that as a diagnosis so that we could move to appropriate responses pretty quickly. Did that answer your question? Thank you. Other questions? So thank you all so much for coming. There is all sorts of cookies and goodies that Kathy McCarty so kindly laid out for us. And so please go enjoy. Thank you very much.